Howdy, all of you delicious people. There's someone inside your house, just so you know, just so you're aware, just so you have a prerequisite warning that someone might be, or probably someone is because you live with someone, because that's bound to probably happen, right? So, going into this film, how did I feel about this movie? This movie was actually refreshing. I really enjoyed this movie. I was like, oh my god, here's a concept that I could actually get behind. Here's an actual concept of a slasher movie that is to really be a feel good kind of thing because the person that this person's going after, it's like, oh, so there's a real legit reason uh, to have this person kill said person and not feel 1 ounce of remorse because each one of these people are to be holding some dark, deep down secret that no one wants anyone to know, but eventually will get out. Uh, Really, to me, this almost feels like a little bit like either Dexter or the David Boreanaz film Valentine, which I've reviewed on this channel. Go ahead and check it out. I thoroughly enjoy Valentine, even though I don't enjoy Valentine's Day. It's a weird movie, but a movie that I is like a revenge film, and this almost feels like a revenge film. So if I've already praised this movie good and well enough, go ahead and check it out if you never have, because it's a good enough film, or I would say it's a solid good film, but I have problems with it, and let's go and talk about that. So the overall story of this movie doesn't really matter. We have to forcibly invest in a person because they seem to spend more time. So I guess you have to invest in this person who kind of becomes like the Nev Campbell of this movie, or the kind of the main focus character for a while, because after they're done kind of stabbing and killing people. But yeah, so I enjoyed this movie because I like this idea that eventually this person is going after this person for a horrific reason, and then you're just like, okay, killer, go ahead, like slice this person. I'm okay with that. Weirdly, uh, like, yeah, they have something underneath their closet that is to be some horrific secret that is to definitely garner them to die, and I'm just like, go get them. And that feels weird. So, but here's also the thing. Like, it really gets to the point in these slasher movies where it really doesn't matter anymore who really the killer is, or what their reasoning is for doing this. And it kind of feels like the same kind of thing within this film. Uh, Plus, also, really, I was to like have to be forced with this like certain kind of group to be attached to them while eventually they're trying to um, make a guy who's obviously an outcast through this whole school. They end up deciding to make a friend with him, and like that's the only real story that happens throughout this whole entire film, because every other scene is kill, 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 slice, slice, slice. uh we do have both uh, Makani, I think is her name. I'm just gonna call her Young because it's easy. Uh, we have Young and we have Ollie, who are to eventually have this kind of relationship where eventually Young suspiciously questions whether or not Ollie is to be the killer or not. So we have to kind of go through that kind of formulaic run of things. But, and some people may have some thoughts or consensuses of who the killer actually is. And normally it's like the most like least screen timed person. So time it out who has had the very fewest lines or has had the very fewest like appearances or something, or also just really just think that it's probably somebody who could quite possibly be driving somebody around. Suspiciously think of that also. I'm not going to tell anybody who the killer is until we get to spoilers. So I want to really try to throw kind of things to make people like, oh yeah, I know who the killer is. Well, so do I. I saw the movie. But anyways, so going into this, like, the story doesn't matter, but the kills do. That's all that really matters for this film. That's why I just say that this movie is a solid, good movie, and it could be great. It could have been a really great film, but here's the sad thing. There probably will never be a sequel to this film. Like, I think that this movie garners, like, a sequel. I think this deserves a sequel, because I think that this movie was good and interesting enough to get another shot at this. But I just hope that there's a better story from this rather than they're just relying on the interesting kind of masked individual and the approach of these things. I also would have liked there to be more kills in this movie. So here's the funny thing. So it's like, I really want a lot of more people to die, but then I also want really good story, and you can't have both. But still, we really didn't get a good enough story. It's just some high schoolish story, and everything is to really just be tied into that. And a lot of that is just like blah, 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 blah on me, because I hate freaking high school stories or high school anything. That's why I don't like Spider-Man most of the time. Like, I can't wait till he gets out of college. He no longer has to, or high school or college or whatever, and we no longer have to deal with that garbage. So, uh, so teeing it up, what is this movie about? So everyone is to hold secrets within them, and so this killer is going to find out this person's deepest, darkest secret and use it against them, all while going and also making this like silicone or plastic variation of this person's own face that they're going after, which I was like, oh my god, that is so amazing. Like, cause yeah, like, I wish that there was some way where they could have digitally like just put on that mask. But it reminds me so much of Valentine that I can just be okay with it. But if they would have done it digitally, then this person could have killed more. This person could have changed his face more. But like, I bet if they do a sequel, that's what they're gonna do, is to have this like digital face be put on, so that way it doesn't have to do that every single time. But I don't know. I had a lot of fun with this movie, and it's weird to kind of say that. Because really, you know how many like people that a slasher person would kill, and it's the most innocent goody two shoe person, and you always have that thing of like, well, why is this killer going after this person? Why go after this nice, sweet little... Oh, no, 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 I'm taking that statement back. That's what this kind of movie does, where it's all of a sudden you're just like, oh, why is the killer going after this guy, this person that seems to have done no wrong, because we don't know any single backstory about this person. And then we're like, oh, wait, there's the backstory. Like, we end up having Katie, who is this girl who is to be this like churchgoer and this very religious person, and all this and like we get the swerve of that, and I'm like, oh my god, this is a freaking amazing film, because it's deep dark secrets of people. But anyways, so like, I kind of teed it up, but yeah, so and we also have to spend time with Young's character, who has a grandmother that has some sleepwalking problems, where eventually Young is to possibly think that her gram is doing something, and then it ends up being really just possibly a killer going and wanting to set something up for her. But yeah, so it feels like Dexter. It feels like Valentine. It's kind of like a revenge kind of thing. And even though, like, really we don't have this person. Like, it's a revenge story, but then again, it's not that, like, all these people teamed up together to go after this person and tried to, like, horrifically kill them off, like I Know What You Did Last Summer, like something like that. But it's somewhat quasi like that, I guess. So let's go into it. Let's go into that double five time territory, because it's about that time to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time you get to spoil this movie. Let's go into it. So, really, right out of the gate, we basically just focus on someone getting killed in this story, because I guess it's like, who cares? Like, let's just continue to just focus on every one of the kills, because that's all that matters in this movie. There's rarely any story that I could really care about in between the kills, because there's just nothing there. Basically, the only story is there's to be this one guy who is coincidentally gay, who everyone is to just say that he could quite possibly be the killer of this. Let's go with the obvious new guy in town, that he's going to be the killer. And it ends up that it's not that guy whatsoever. And so eventually this group of people lets this guy, like, sit next to him, or sit next to them. And then eventually when they all go into their car, they're just so happy that they did something good by bringing this guy in to sit with them, because I guess Young at some point was an outsider, and eventually I guess this group that she was with let her in and got to be nice to her and have her be one of them. So, like, that's the only real seemingly story here that I could give a rip about. Because basically, the focus is, like, the aftermath of the first person's death, and that, like, goes into, like, the next person's death, and, like, and so on. And so, like, really, that's the whole tying of here. So let's get into it. So, the very first death is to, of course, be from a guy called Jackson Pace. So, Jackson Pace is to be some kind of athlete, we're to naturally assume. He has a leather jacket on him, and so on and so forth. So, Jackson is eventually going into his home, and all of a sudden, once he is to get into his closet, he is to all of a sudden notice that there is a bunch of photos of him doing this crime of sorts, that is to be putting a bag over someone's head, maybe beating them or hurting them or something. We don't know, because they didn't really definitively say what exactly he did. But, so all of a sudden, Jackson now just kind of like, okay, like, where is Booger Man? So Jackson starts swinging against his clothes, and then all of a sudden the slasher guy ends up coming with his hand from underneath all the clothes to slice Jackson's ankles, and so he falls over. And so Jackson is like, hey man, like, you could get out of here, like, you could run off, like, I didn't actually get to see your face, because Jackson is to look at this killer, and the face of the killer is actually his own. And I was like, oh my god, that's such an interesting concept. Like, to kill someone and individually, because of course you have to kill someone individually, makes the most sense for a slasher movie. But, like, the best revenge is to basically look into your own face as you are to die, because you are the real killer here. You are the killer of yourself. And I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting, because maybe this secret is really weighing on somebody and they don't realize it. Maybe it has, like, led them to eventually be tortured by this secret. And, like, especially when we get to Young, the main character here, like I could really tell that she seems to be having nightmares about this secret. So like really this secret is like eating away at her, and I thought that that was really interesting. So of course we have Jackson's killer, the mimic faced person, let's just say, because it could be a woman, it doesn't have to be a man. So this person is to slice right into Jackson and kill him off. So we start to have people that are mourning this guy's loss, and so there is to seemingly be a friend of his that is to be on the sports team, whatever. I'm assuming football. I don't know. I didn't pay that ridiculous amount of attention. So this one person is to do his own ceremony in front of the school, singing this song, and like it seems that Young and her group of people are all listening to this, and they're like, you know what, he like sings actually pretty decent. And so eventually that carries on for eventually Jackson to, I guess, eventually have a funeral being put together, yada yada yada. And so we have Katie, who's to like kind of mention, because she's a very religious person, that like, hey, if anybody needs any kind of like spiritual enlightenment kind of thing, like we could all kind of meet together or something like that to just talk about this or whichever, because this is like the overly religious person. So what ends up happening is like we're just really just pushing on to like the whole church meeting thing, and so because I want to see if this, like, I want to remember if this was not a normal day of church or Jackson's funeral. I think this was Jackson's funeral. So Katie is to eventually go on and kind of set up for Jackson's funeral, and so she is to seemingly be talking to somebody in this church that is to be wearing uh, the same kind of robe or thing that Katie's wearing also. And so all of a sudden, Katie is getting a text from this guy named Marcus saying, like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm really deathly ill. Maybe. Because you never know with people. They could be like, oh, I'm ill, and they're not really ill. But yeah, so Katie is to have been talking to someone, and she naturally assumes it's Marcus, because who else would it have been? And maybe the killer. So Katie goes and calls Marcus, and she's like, Marcus, like, what prank are you weirdly pulling? Because I'm sorry, like, you're saying that you're sick and you can't be here, but I just talked to you like a second ago. And Marcus is like, what? Like, I'm not really there. So all of a sudden, we end up seeing the person who is to supposedly be Marcus instead is to be Killer with now Katie's mask on. And I'm like, yeah. So we find out that evidently Katie is to be this anonymous podcaster who I guess podcasts like things about racism and all kinds of goofy, crappy things. And so now, like Katie is just like, well, I thought that that was anonymous. I didn't think anybody would figure out it was me. Blah 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 blah. It's like somebody went out of their way to find out. Somebody went out of their way to figure things out. Like, so, you know, so like someone could obviously trace that voice and figure out it's her. Like, obviously. So now Katie is running for her life, going into the confessional, trying to like try to hold herself out there. in the confessional, but eventually the killer goes and like slices through the confessional with this knife. So there's nowhere really to run for Katie, and so eventually this all just leads with uh, when people are to eventually come to the church, they find Katie hung in the air, and they're like, "Oh my god!" Uh, so now like everyone is starting to get paranoid, and they're really just starting to eventually realize, well, hey man, maybe if we go and have a party and we all talk about what our deepest, darkest secret is, then the killer won't go after us. So they put this whole party together just to tell everybody, hey, if you have a deep, dark, deep down, deep underwater secret, like how about tell everyone so that way you won't get killed and you'll be safe. Because it's going to get out anyways. Because eventually every time the killer kills someone, eventually they also like put out their secret also to everyone, and they find out what their secret is. So I guess that's why they assumed that the newest person in this school was the one killing everybody for whatever reason. So we go to this party, and so everyone is to reveal their secret. There is to be this guy named Rodrigo next to this one girl, and so the girl that's next to Rodrigo is to mention, it's like, well, my deepest, darkest secret is that I was actually kind of attracted to Rodrigo. And Rodrigo was like, oh, really? And she was like, yeah. And so Rodrigo is just like, uh, well, guess what my secret is? My deepest, darkest secret is that I like you too. And so then both of them go into this room and start heavily making out. And the girl's like, well, are you serious that that was your darkest secret? And the guy was like, well, yeah. But, so we end up finding out what this guy's secret actually is that evidently, I guess, he has an addiction to painkillers. So all of a sudden, everyone at this party is like, dude, we're gonna get the heck out of here because the secret is being released about Rodrigo. So everyone just look out for a guy that has the mask of Rodrigo, and let's all get the F out of here. So everyone leaves, and so what ends up happening forcibly is that eventually this killer is to come after Rodrigo, and he ends up getting drowned into this fountain filled with beer, and that's how he ends up getting like killed, of course. So now we have like a kind of a parting ways of here where it's a little bit of a while before someone actually gets killed. So uh so really, we just have Mr. Sanford, who's to be this la-di-da rich guy, and so he is to want to put together this whole corn maze to have everybody just kind of like remember tradition and like have something to do, because it's like, hey, like we're gonna like make sure that this whole corn maze thing is protected. Like we want somebody to be out, like go out and just have fun. Like come on, people. So uh so now like so young is to have this Graham that she's living with, grandmother. Anyways, so Young is living with this grandmother, and it seems like she's a sleepwalker. It seems that there are plenty of times where Young is to wake up in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden, like, there's all these furniture that are being moved around, and probably purses that are being put in the oven, and all kinds of goofy sleepwalkerish things. Where eventually Young wakes up in the middle of the night to find her grandmother sleepwalking, and then all of a sudden finds there's like a bunch of stuff shifted around, and Young is like, wow, that's new. Never saw her do that before. So, so Young is to eventually like have a bell on this on her grandmother's door, so I guess she doesn't get very far, and so they're trying to get a bottle on like her Gram's sleepwalking thing, but like eventually we just have Young who's just to consistently watch over her grandmother while she's sleepwalking. Uh, so eventually, what ends up happening is because I think there's a death in between the very last death, or I think there was like a stabbing thing that happened. So let's get to that. So Young is to uh, seemingly bump into Ollie, and Ollie is to be this guy who is to eventually start talking to Young without really talking to her. Like Ollie's like, "Oh hey Young, like yeah, it's been a long time, right? Yeah, I know. Like it's been like this guy's doing his own dialogue between the two of them because she won't actually talk to him, and so she's like, "What are you doing?" And so he ends up getting up, sitting next to her, and he's like, "Yeah, we haven't talked for I don't know how long." And so I thought that we could have a conversation now while they're to be at the sheriff's office. So uh, eventually, the sheriff is to mention to Ollie, who's actually his uh, excuse me, his brother. Like the sheriff is Ollie's older brother, sheriff, or maybe it's deputy. Yeah, I think it's Deputy Larson because I think the sheriff is Sheriff Atkins, so I think yeah, because the it's the younger one of the two, so yeah, it's the deputy. So, uh, so eventually Ollie and Young start to talk more, and so eventually Ollie's wanting to take Young, uh, out to supposedly the ocean, and Young is like, "Yeah, I don't think that's going to be an easy task for us to get to the ocean." And Ollie's like, "Well, like we're going to get to something that's close enough." And so they go and they listen to this this cassette track, really throwing it back there to have this weird cassette track. I guess that's the only thing that he had on him, and so they go to this cornfield and then like there's just a breeze going on at the cornfield, which I guess that can somewhat feel like the ocean, I guess, or seem like the ocean, or just kind of have like a wave of something kind of brushing back and forth. I don't know. So eventually Young is to well, Ollie's to kind of go out in the cornfield a little bit. Young is to eventually open Ollie's glove compartment to find that there is the taser there, and so she ends up closing it because she's like, "Oh no, what is he gonna do with me?" Like, evidently, Young doesn't know that people are getting killed with this thing called a knife. What all of a sudden makes Ollie the villain here? I just don't quite get it. But Young is to kind of make the assumption that Ollie is the murderer here because she thinks that he's very suspicious, aka having a taser in his glove compartment. So eventually, Young runs off to eventually get picked up by this Uber driver that seems very suspicious because we see the Uber driver from time to time. I think before eventually certain people are to get killed, which a lot of people will quickly forget about that. But I spotted him in some certain spots, which like, and I also think that Young, while she was driving in this Uber car, I think the Uber driver is to mention like something about like you'd be surprised about how many numerous people would tell me any kind of things during this drive, or uh, like I'm sure like he would pick up on so many phone conversations while while he's in the car with them because they probably would not care. So like it would have been really actually interesting if like the Uber driver guy was the one who was the killer. I thought that would have been a really good thing. And now that we're to be into spoilers, that wasn't actually the killer. So I'm like, okay, like I was thinking like the Uber guy like seems suspicious, but it seems like he had like some line deliveries. Like I was looking for a person that like you least expected was the killer, and that wasn't really the Uber driver. I was kind of thinking like, okay, who was the person like is who's the nicest person or has the least amount of lines or screen time or something, and I was possibly thinking that it had to be in Young's group of friends where there has to be some kind of misfit story going on in there. But here's the thing also, I never quite figured it out towards the end. Like I was getting so close, but like it was just right out of my grasp. So because I didn't know who everyone was, and there wasn't enough time to marinate on that either, to really get to know everyone in this movie. Uh, so Young calls the cops on Ollie. Ollie gets arrested because he had a taser, and so I think his brother ends up bailing him out, and so when Ollie is to return to school, Young is getting the text message that Ollie's back in school. So Young is to uh, run away from where Ollie is, and all of a sudden Young is to run right into I think a guy named Caleb, and Caleb gets stabbed while uh, while kind of bumping into Young. And so Caleb falls over and the killer is right there. And I'm like, is this like the Scream, like bait and switch kind of thing? Where eventually the killer calls Sydney. It's like, sorry, wrong guy. But then you find out that there's two of them, and one of them was actually Ollie, and the other was actually like Stu from Scream the whole time. Why did he come in this movie? I don't know. He just really needed some money. Uh, so so yeah, so the killer gets right into Young's face and hands her the knife and then walks off because he has weirdly a sword into his in like he's holding on to a sword also weirdly. That just seemed kind of random. So But yeah, so evidently this killer is to have killed Caleb, but doesn't quite do good enough work because they quickly ended up getting this guy to the hospital, and he's in critical condition, but he doesn't die. So I'm like, okay, so we have one saving grace thing here, but we also I don't think we knew what that guy's secret was, but I guess because he's dead, it doesn't really matter. So it was just trying to eventually kind of make Young quite possibly the killer, but Ollie saw the guy running off, and then Ollie was there to try to comfort Young and be like, hey, you okay? And she's like, yeah, and he's like, okay, good. So kind of really showcasing that Ollie is also not the killer, and I'm like, I was never thinking that at all. Like I was never thinking that Ollie was the killer. Like there's too much about this guy that also seems like he's the killer, so he's not the killer. It's the person you least expect for this freaking movie. So now pushing on to the big next event. So So now we have this corn maze thing, and immediately once they were to focus on this corn maze thing, I'm like, oh my god, this is going to be a way to kill a huge amount of people. Like, I was thinking, I'm like, man, here's one spot where this killer can come in and kill just a ton of people in this town, and wouldn't that be great? Weirdly, because I'm weird. So, but, uh, but wait. Let's get also to the young stuff first. Also, so we'll get to that, and then we'll cover the corn maze thing because that's really the end of the movie, anyways. So Young eventually is to be at home, and like she hears somebody moving around, and she thinks that it's Graham. So she's like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna start just walking around the house and seeing what's going on. So all of a sudden, Young is to realize that there's to be a fire in the house, or that there is a fireplace being lit. And so anything, I guess, having to do with fire, or just seemingly anything, because this girl has nightmares about this consistently. Young supposedly, let's actually get to why Young is to seemingly have these weird flashes of nightmares. So it seems put onto her forehead, she has the B word, Bitch, kind of plopped onto her forehead, because she evidently, when she made it to varsity for whatever thing she was involved in, the other students of whatever sport she was in, maybe cheerleading, I don't know, decided to haze her. And like, there's so many things that are so vague about this movie. Like, I don't know, like maybe there was a story there that corrected all this or said all this, but I missed that part. But anyways, so these girls, which I'm assuming they're cheerleaders, are to eventually haze these girls, so much so, like, they're almost like drowning them in alcohol. It's horrible. And like almost like waterboarding them or whatever. It looks freaking awful. So these girls get so like drunk and so confused and so disoriented, and like almost to the point of like near torture things going on, that eventually what accidentally happens is two girls are kind of like pushing themselves, and like coincidentally both of them are kind of pushing themselves near this fire that is to be happening in this, I guess, beach or whatever that they're at. And so all of a sudden Young goes and accidentally pushes this girl into the fire, not really realizing at all what she's doing because she's so disoriented. And so this girl named Jasmine had to be sent to the hospital, and like she had like really horrible burns onto her body, and plus also it probably didn't help all that much that she had a bunch of alcohol through her system also. So so Young had this girl's number still, and was so like tortured by this that she wanted to eventually call this girl and apologize for what she had done. Like, she decided to move away and change her name, and try to do anything that she could possibly do to have anyone forget who she was. And so she moved here to try to make a fresh start, and that's what she ended up doing. So now that I've covered that, so Young eventually goes into this room, this fireplace room, to find all the pictures of all these burns of all this of really just this girl, and immediately probably everyone's thinking, oh, it's got to be the Jasmine girl, and she's trying to make it to where like she is to eventually find out just other people's random secrets, but it's really all just to get to this one girl. And a lot of people could have that thought process and whatever. And like, I think that that could have been justified, but That, that is a very interesting theory. But that is a very interesting theory, let's say. So now Young is to go into this room, and so we of course again have the killer who is to grab this piece of fiery wood, and eventually Young is to kind of fight off this killer, and then eventually take this killer's mask off and drop it off to the side. So this killer ends up running off, and we don't get to see the mask of this person. Young doesn't get to see the mask of this person, and so really we have this one moment where the killer was supposed to take down Young and fails, which is kind of interesting because I'm like, man, he or she did all this setup to eventually just kind of ruin this moment where like they didn't triumph, but of course they wouldn't, because this is like the Nev Campbell whatever character, the Sydney character, where she's going to make it to the very end. So now we have the whole cornfield thing going on. So now we have this cornfield maze, and Young is to figure out, like, well, that's how this killer is going to go after everybody. So we now need to go to this corn maze and, like, see what's what. So Ollie is driving all these people, like Young and her friends and everybody, to this corn maze, and now I'm just like, well, who's the person out of this group that is to be missing? Is immediately what we have to think. Out of seemingly the ones who all hugged Young in the hospital and like kind of try to comfort her and whatever after this whole moment happened, and I'm just thinking, who is the one that's missing out of this whole scenario? So now we have Young, who's to tell Ollie, because there seemingly is a pretty good amount of flames that are happening in this cornfield. So Young is to tell Ollie, like, hey, like, you said that this car was a piece of crap anyways, right? And Ollie's like, what are you talking about? Young wants Ollie to drive through this maze of fire to get to the part where there is to be someone there that they could quite possibly save, and hopefully they don't run anybody down while they're to do this. So they go and they drive through this maze, and so Mr. Sanford is to be the next culprit to die. So we have this group kind of go and get out of their car, because the car is probably going to blow up anyways. So eventually they head to find Mr. Sanford at the end of a sword with the killer that has Mr. Sanford's face. And I'm like, yeah, I love this. This whole concept of the thing is so interesting. So here's the thing. So there isn't any pictures from Mr. Sanford. There isn't like a trophy room case thing, whatever, to just be like, aha, here's your revenge. But so the killer ends up stabbing Mr. Sanford, and so now the killer is ticked off because he didn't get enough time to have anything to tell Mr. Sanford about, like, the reason why he's dead, like any number of things that he could have said to him. Like, he didn't get that kind of time. So eventually now the killer is to have this sword and to now go up against this group. And so now we, of course, end up having Young, who is to knock off this person's mask. And we end up finding out that it's Zach, Mr. Sanford's son. And he is so just annoyed that he didn't get that chance to be able to tell his father about the times that he was forced to read The Art of War and any kinds of bull crap that his father, like, forced down his throat. And he wanted to have said any of that, but he didn't have the time. So he ended up having to quickly kill this person. and not be able to marinate on any single one of it. So the reason why Zach, this seemingly rando person that is a killer, Zach is just supposedly kill people because he is stinking rich, that he was basically born with a golden spoon up his butt. So, and everybody gave him crap about that forever. So, that, like, really his riches weren't actually his, it was his father's, and so on and so forth. So, Zach was so upset about that for I don't know how long, to forcibly be an outcast because he's Richie Rich Boy. And so he decided that he was to finally just go and get everyone's deep dark secret and put it out for everyone to see, because now that everyone is to kind of flaunt like that this guy is rich and there was nothing he could ever do about it, he is going to go and take everyone's secret about them and use it against them. So yeah, like, I thought that that was really interesting, but I just don't think it was a good enough story, like, because we don't really focus on much of anybody besides Young or maybe Ollie, and that was about it. Like, we don't really get to understand who any of the other people really are in this world, except for the person or people that end up getting killed. So, uh, so Zach is kind of having this moment where he is to probably want to pin all of these murders on Young. If he wasn't giving her the knife before, like, he's really probably wanting to give her the knife now and reveal this secret, and to say that she had done this because she has probably a much more horrible secret than anyone else has. But we get where Zach is caught off guard because Ollie is to get stabbed, and Ollie's to still have this taser. Ollie tries to taser Zach, and Ollie misses, but that leaves reasonably Young the ability to stab Zach and kill him off. And so now everybody is to know the truth and what is, like, really going on here, and finally all this is resolved. Like, now everybody can just be, like, fine again or okay again. And so at the end of this, we really just have Young, who decides that she wants to finally call Jasmine and I guess apologize for what she had done, and maybe change her name back. Maybe just be like, hey, like whatever, like, I'm gonna be me, and I'm not gonna hide from my mistake, because technically it wasn't her fault. Technically, it was the fault of the people who were putting this whole thing together. Um, like, it would be cool to eventually see a sequel of this where, like, eventually the secrets are more intriguing and you really get to invest in all the characters, and instead of this just really focusing on the death moments and why these people are to die. I wish there would have been more than that. But with that said, oh well. It's a really refreshing concept. It's a really just refreshing movie. I really enjoyed it. But with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Hopefully I have nothing else left to eventually say about this movie. Maybe not everything was done perfectly. There might have been little snippets or whatever that I forgot about, because really the focusing was on the deaths. So with that said, more than likely there might be something here or whatever. So anyways, goodbye everybody. Bye everybody.